Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so the other day, Ryan Grimm from Dropsite News and formerly of The Intercept, he went on Tim Dillon's show. Tim Dillon, the comedian, part of this gaggle of comedians that they take on this populist affect because they have an audience that is essentially populist, a mishmash of mostly right-leaning and reactionary types who like comedy and have become increasingly political over the years. That's sort of the demographic of Tim Dillon. And Ryan Grimm went on his show to talk about the Epstein Files and the global implications of some of the stuff that's coming out about Epstein, as well as the reporting that Dropsite News has been doing about Epstein, and a little bit about how much it implicates Trump, although more so what they talked about is this sort of global structure of what it was that Epstein was doing and the nature of the connections that he had. And that is a lot of the reporting that Dropsite has been doing, is talking about some of the very detailed stuff that Epstein was involved in and things that have been kind of pieced together that are still a little broken narratively, but definitely paint an interesting picture of the kind of things Epstein was up to outside of the well-known sex crimes, which also tie in with those crimes and that sort of ring that he was leading. Because if these same people that he was doing these global political financial deals with were also involved in some of those crimes, now you have a serious blackmailing operation. So that's essentially the prevailing narrative when it comes to Epstein, and Ryan Grimm specifically has been doing a lot of work fleshing that out. I will note that a lot of the stuff that Ryan Grimm does seem to be getting through sources isn't necessarily related to Donald Trump. It's more about sort of the global implications and other figures like the former prime minister of Israel, etc. So here's a clip of Ryan Grimm talking to Tim Dillon about this, getting into the details of what this organization might have looked like, and then I'll give an update on where things are at with the Epstein Files currently, as well as what I think the implications of this picture that he's painting might be.
Usually you go into the reporting and you find out that the story you're looking for isn't quite all the way there. It's not quite as interesting as you kind of imagined that it might be. This kind of has been the reverse. Like this, you keep peeling the layers back and you're like, oh wow, that was true, that was true, that was true, and on and on. You know, when they say there was no Epstein operation, it's like the guy's been doing a lot of operating for many decades, and at some point you're going to have to call that an operation, because he keeps becoming involved and he keeps being found from Iran-Contra all the way up to the things that you were talking about, the Syrian civil war, like a lot going on in Africa, which was a piece of Iran-Contra as well, the kind of unspoken piece of it. The fact that he focused so much on Africa really shows that he really does kind of know where power flows and where money, commodities, and resources flow. So yeah, there's an awful lot there. But if you think of the kind of global elite as kind of organized around that Davos conference, or this Davos crew out there, right, like the CIA, it's more properly understood that CIA works for them, and right. Jeffrey Epstein was an integral player in that Davos set, and I think sometimes his allies and he himself was waning. He's not doing as well. Other times his power is on the rise. That's how it works inside nebulous organizations like this. But he's right there at the center of this, fundamentally undemocratic global institution. It's not even an institution. It's just this amoebic type of entity. He's right there in the middle of it, and he still has to jockey for power. But he is then able to deploy his own assets, whether it's Mossad or whether it's people in the CIA, in order to serve he and his allies' own interests, which sometimes align with the interests of Israel, sometimes align with the interests of the U.S., but they're also self-serving interests. What you need a Jeffrey Epstein for, going back to our kind of transnational cartel operating as a state kind of thing, is that if you want to move money, guns, let's say you want to move weapons from Iran to the Contras in Nicaragua, or you want to move them to some type of rebel group in Africa when Congress has told you can't fund this rebel group in Africa, or you've got blood diamonds that you've got to get moving out. You can't really go to the white shoe firms for that.
Right.
They're going to be like,
right.
Let me get your client here. Like,
right.
how do we know that this person isn't sanctioned? This appears to be a terrorist organization that
right.
you're shipping
right.
weapons to.
Right.
This is the way that this Davos set operates globally. And the more we know about it, the better.
But would you say that this is also the way that countries like Russia operate, and China, and all of these big, powerful countries?
Yes, I think because we in Western Europe are nominally democratic, we have a slightly greater need for people operating in the shadows.
Right.
Whereas I think that paradoxically, Russia and China can be a little bit more explicit about how they're going to manage their operations.
Right.
It's like, what are you going to say about it? Like,
right.
this is what we're doing. The very planes that the CIA was using to do Iran-Contra, Epstein then transitions from that to running Victoria's Secret lingerie and Abercrombie and Fitch stuff from Hong Kong and China. So like that's another connection where you're like, hold on, Jeffrey Epstein brought the CIA's like airline to Ohio to work for Wexner, and then when it's done, it goes to Angola, where they were also shipping weapons. Did you see the email that came out just the other day in the latest tranche, where there was one federal prosecutor writing to others, where he said, just as a situational awareness, or whatever the words are they use, looks like President Trump, and this was during the first term, flew on Epstein's airplane, significantly more times than was previously known, and he was also on there twice with Maxwell while there were victims on the plane during the time that we're investigating her for sex trafficking.
Right.
Just a heads up, like this is something y'all might want to know because this is our boss, like at this particular moment. Like that right there, in any normal world, would be utterly devastating. So this is a convicted sex trafficker, Maxwell. Forget Epstein.
She's not convicted at that time, though.
Not yet, but
okay.
was getting investigated. Now we know she's a convicted
right.
sex trafficker, and there were victims on the plane while the president, or wasn't the president yet,
right.
but while Trump is on the plane. And so, at best at that point, you can be like, well, I didn't see anything. But everybody
right.
else who's ever been around these folks are like, no, this was like debaucherous, disgusting stuff.
Right.
There's no way you didn't see this. And also we know that, he did that whole thing where he's like, what did he say on Howard Stern? He bought Miss Teen USA so he could like creep into the locker room.
All right,
Not an
so
ideal
like
statement.
I said, Ryan Grimm has been doing good work about this. I think it was good for him to go on Tim Dillon's show and talk about this. Although I know people have mixed opinions about both of these guys, really. But even Ryan Grimm, a lot of people on the left don't, love every opinion that he has. I don't know. He's an opinionated guy. I think any journalist who is also opinionated is going to attract frustration. So I don't necessarily agree with everything Ryan says, but I do think he's done good work on this, and I think it's a good idea to go on Tim Dillon's show, because the audience that Tim Dillon has, not only is it this kind of like right-leaning type of audience, a lot of them are Trump supporters, or maybe were Trump supporters and are doubting that now, or never were Trump supporters, but maybe just fall a little bit closer on that side of the map. And a lot of those type of people are the ones that are questioning Trump over this Epstein stuff, and very well could contribute to the electoral dynamic changing going forward. The coalition that was brought together in part by podcasting voices like Tim Dillon, Joe Rogan, Theo Vaughn, is part of what gave the Republican win in 2024 this like revitalized vibe of like more young people who are involved, more interesting voices that are saying more interesting things than Republicans are known for saying in the past. A lot of it is bordering on or openly embracing fascism. But then you have this more populist strain where people seem more open to ideas that have to do with like the average working American or whatever. And so I think it's good to reach some of those people with this message, specifically because the Epstein thing is one of the biggest things driving a wedge between that cohort of people and Donald Trump. And we have yet to see what the actual implications of that are. It has gone back and forth. At first, it seemed like people really cared about the Epstein stuff, and that it was like one of the first things that was actually hurting Donald Trump's political coalition. But then it seemed like people kind of, moved on, or at least the narrative moved on temporarily. Now we're back to it, and this bill has passed to release all of these files. And every time stuff comes out, it seems to get worse for Trump. Some of it genuinely seems to not be real, or it's hard to tell if it's real. There's many layers to it, but a lot of it seems to be just stuff that the FBI has collected over the years in relation to Epstein. So some of it is just like anonymous tips and that sort of thing, but there's a lot of very eyebrow-raising stuff in there, also related to Trump, things that implicate him in various vague accusations, nothing that ties him directly to what Epstein was known to be doing in a way that there is substantial evidence for. But there's a lot still coming out, and I would say that the most concrete thing is the thing they mentioned here about how Trump flew on Epstein's plane multiple times with Ghislaine Maxwell and victims of Ghislaine Maxwell's and Jeffrey Epstein's at a time that they were investigating them for those particular crimes. So to me, that indicates that not only might he have had something to do with that, or obviously I think that that is implicating in itself that he was there. We already knew this, but now we're seeing internal communications at the FBI that are giving it the heads up that, essentially there's more. It seems to me that they would have more information specifically about what happened on those flights. If that was at the time where Ghislaine Maxwell was being investigated, they're saying they stumbled across that information, that there was more there later. I'm not really sure how that works because it seems like that would have come up. So now Trump is saying there's like 1 million more files that they have to go through. That could just be a stalling tactic or something less organized that they stumbled across that they now have to comb through, because that is part of the law that was signed about the Epstein Files, is that they have to be gone through to make sure nothing is identifying the victims. But then, now there is some increased scrutiny of Pam Bondi as well as Trump over the fact that they're also redacting the names of some of the implicated people, which is specifically against the law. So Ro Khanna and Massey have already discussed impeachment over Pam Bondi. Who knows if that would ever come to anything, but even them just letting that get out to the public is them exercising the leverage they have as Congress to say, you have to follow this law that we passed and make sure all of this stuff gets released. And that's as well as them failing to redact things properly. So a lot of the stuff that implicates Trump got through without them wanting it to, or instances where his name was redacted where it can be easily undone and that sort of thing. So major flop, and it's one of the main things that makes him look bad to his base. It's possible that it will come to a point where it's, they're kind of numb to it, as with everything about Donald Trump. But at the same time, a lot of these people, especially the ones a little more detached from politics, have had it drilled into their brain that the number one thing you should care about is these guys being involved in these sort of like global pedophile cabals. If they know basically nothing else about politics, they know that that's bad and that they don't want that. And so this is the first time I think the cognitive dissonance is being made conscious with a lot of these people. And so it's a good audience of people to reach, not necessarily because they can be convinced or persuaded of one thing or another, but more so because it just helps to drive this wedge in Trump's base. It's one of the few things that seems to be genuinely politically damaging to Trump. So keep turning the screws. I think it's a good thing to do. As far as this broader analysis of what Epstein was up to, interestingly, I'm seeing some similarities between what Ryan Grimm is saying here about the way global power works to essentially what Chomsky said about how power works. And he had a book that came out in 2014 called Who Rules the World? And essentially this was him laying out a similar idea to what Ryan Grimm is saying here, the concept that there's no one group of people or cabal of people that work in unison to control the world, but rather different interests and financial interests and political interests that vie for world power, have different amounts of world power based on whatever resources they happen to have access to at the moment. And in the sense that they're all part of the same class, they have solidarity in that sense, but they are constantly fighting each other for power, and power wanes and ebbs and flows, no pun intended. And so that's what he's saying about Epstein here and his ability to have influence in these circles based on whoever he was friends with at the time, whoever he was cavorting with at the time. He had more or less leverage in some of these rooms that he was trying to get himself in. And that is part of what motivated him to make friends with the people that he made friends with, is, calculated moves about who would be the right people to be friends with at the right times. And, it's known now that he was friends with Noam Chomsky, and Noam Chomsky has even said that Epstein had a kind of an influence on him and made him rethink certain things. He praised Epstein's intelligence and his ability to contend with his more high-level ideas about how the world worked. And so to me, what that says is that Epstein might have given him a bit of a glimpse into how some of these things work and what these relationships of power are like, because based on what Chomsky said, he met Epstein around 2011 or something like that, wrote this book shortly after. They were friends for years and had multiple kinds of correspondence, as well as even some money transferred back and forth, which Noam Chomsky denied had anything to do with Epstein actually giving him money. So to me, that says that at the time where he wrote this book, which was his analysis about how global power works, that was when he was friends with Epstein. Not sure how much those two things are related, but they do overlap. And so with all of this being said, I think that when it comes to what we're looking at, with all of these files coming out, all this being exposed, and this conversation happening, as well as the conversation about America's relationship with Israel, how global power works in all of these different ways, we are probably moving towards some kind of power vacuum in the space that Ryan Grim is describing here, that Epstein was able to be a part of and draw people into. Because the more of it that is exposed, the more it's going to interrupt those business systems that still exist. And that was part of the reason they wanted to shut down the Epstein thing as quickly as possible, is so that business could resume without him. And so it's going to make it so that not only do they have to find new ways to create these connections, these political connections, but also some of the major players in these games, specifically Donald Trump, are going down because of it. And he has done a number on the global organization of power. And I think that essentially the story of Donald Trump as it relates to Epstein, without getting too much into what their possible relationship was and how that all went down, I think that because Trump was associated with Epstein, he was able to use that as leverage to gain legitimacy as a global political figure in a way that, before he became president in 2017, seemed truly unthinkable that Donald Trump would be some kind of major world player. But he became that. And it's possible that being friends with Epstein is part of what legitimized him in some of those spaces and gave him some insight into how some of those things work. Not to overemphasize Epstein's importance in changing the way people think, but like Ryan Grim said, he was right there at the center of all of it. And so the fact that Epstein ends up going down while Trump is still in power, and it's still this thing that is bogging Trump down, to me, that implies that the next time there's, a major election in this country in 2028, essentially what's going to be on the ballot is what the global power structure looks like going forward. Because it's going to be the next iteration of Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, or maybe Donald Trump himself running again, or it's going to be some neoliberal Democrat that essentially wants to reestablish these same political relationships under a little bit less heat of public scrutiny and essentially barely reshape things. But also, there's a third option too, which is that because of the amount that things are going to change between now and then, and I know some people say, well, there's not even going to be an election. There probably will be a 2028 election because some kind of election is going to happen. Even if it's a total sham election, it's still going to happen. It's probably not just going to get canceled unless things get really apocalyptic. But what's likely by that time is that a lot of the problems that are bubbling underneath the surface, both with Trump's administration, but also where the world is going at large, is going to create a major turning point in terms of what's going to happen next. And so on the left side, if we don't want some neoliberal stooge that is going to just continue these same systems of power, what is needed instead is somebody who's going to start to identify these real issues about Epstein and the type of influence he had, the relationship of Israel and the seeming impunity of Israel on the world stage, climate change and how that is going to change all of our relationship with the land, as well as creating refugee crisis, which is only going to deepen divides over immigration. These are the issues that are going to define the next generation's interest in politics. And so the only hope for the left to be what opposes the Donald Trumps of the world instead of a neoliberal Kamala Harris type being what opposes the Donald Trumps of the world, is to start now by identifying those problems. Go to the people who need to hear that message, even if it means going on Tim Dillon or wherever else, and to create a strategy to fill that void of power, because the power vacuum is coming. And it's either going to be filled by America because of some neoliberal or outright fascist administration, or it's going to be filled by a different country like China, or there is a chance in these next few years to introduce a set of truly left-wing leaders that can address some of these palpable problems that we see and create sort of a flank effect that drags America back to the left so that we don't tumble into outright murderous fascism.
Me too close to, too much to do. The mission is too crucial. Shout it out from the rooftops until I lose vocals. Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity.